What's good, fam? Teacher Eddie back with another reaction to Oversimplified. So last time I finished up on the Russian Revolution, and now we're doing Cold War. So this is Cold War Part 1. So for those, if this is your first time, unfortunately, I have major issues when it comes to the Oversimplified videos. I always get hit with blocks, so I apologize. As always, I have to put in a little bit of an overlay on the video in order to watch it, but I assume if you're watching this, you've already seen the original anyway, and you're here for a history teacher to kind of break things down and add a few facts here and there. So let's get started.
It is 1917. Fighting rages on the Eastern Front of the First World War. Both Germany and Russia are on the brink of collapse. Soldier, I need you to bring me this man. Got it. Found him, sir. What? No, not Lenin. Lenin.
Oh my God, I love it. I love it. He needs Lenin, or in how Russians would pronounce it would be Lenin. Lenin. But he brings him John Lennon.
The Russian communist. What? Why would I need a beetle? Lenin, the Russian communist. He was exiled to Switzerland. You know what? I'll do it myself. Who wants to start a revolution?
Yo, not for nothing, man. Whatever your beliefs are, the Soviet national anthem is one of the most badass national anthems of all time. But as we discussed in the Russian Revolution reaction that I did, Lenin was exiled from Russia, but eventually was snuck back in because they figured that he would cause chaos, and like System of a Down would say, disorder, disorder.
The Germans put Lenin on a train and sent him all the way back to Russia, hoping he and his mates would create an internal crisis. And create an internal crisis they did. The government was overthrown, and Lenin was in charge. He immediately pulled out of the First World War, made the country communist, started a 3-year-long civil war, got shot, broke the economy, caused a famine, and then he died. On his deathbed he said, "Hey man, tell whoever's in charge of giving people jobs not to let that jerk Stalin become the next leader. By the way, who did I put in charge of giving people jobs? That would be Stalin, sir."
Yeah, so because we already went through everything in the Russian Revolution two-parter, they covered everything that they just covered in like 10 seconds of Lenin's impact on Russia. So there were two revolutions in 1917. The second revolution is the one that most people remember, in which Lenin took charge. And yeah, pretty much from then until he died in 1924, there was internal conflict. There was a civil conflict. Lenin was not liked at the time. He did end up getting shot while giving a speech. And from then on, he was pretty much a frail person, and it was only a matter of time. And yeah, he was not a fan of Stalin. But Stalin, being Stalin and very convincing, a lot of people don't realize, because a lot of historians downplay Stalin's intelligence, Stalin, because of his upbringing, background, and everything else. While he may not have been super book smart, he was very street smart, and he was an absolute paranoid schizophrenic. Due to just all of the experiences he went through in his life, whether the abuse from his father, constantly being looked down upon for not being a true Russian, because he was from Georgia. So he spoke really bad Russian, and was consistently made fun of for it. Also very, very with his deformity. So he had webbed toes. One of his feet were shorter than the other. So he had to wear like a shoe with a lift on it. Also a short man, not very big in stature, but he definitely made up for it big time.
Stalin was a rising force in the Communist Party. He still had some opponents, but conveniently, all of them were arrested or disappeared. So that was lucky. And so Stalin took over. He implemented his 5-year plans, which transformed the country from an agriculture-based economy to an industrial one. And like Lenin before him, he reigned with terror. Anyone who dared criticize or oppose him would either be killed or left to rot in the horrendous Soviet work camps. Then a short man with a silly mustache tried to...
Yeah, so before we get to the short man with the silly mustache, so yes, for all the horrific things, just like, you know, some dictators, like even, you know, Hitler, Mussolini, Stalin at the time, for all the horrific things they did do a lot of good for their country. And Stalin is one of the only one out of the trio during this time who is still remembered very fondly by many Russians. I've done several different videos where Stalin is mentioned. Obviously, all my World War II videos, and me being Russian, of Russian heritage. I have a lot of subscribers who are Russian. And actually, one of my videos was picked up by a Russian newspaper. And I got a lot of hatred from people for my opinions on Stalin. They still see Stalin to this day as a hero. And the reason for that is, up until Stalin, Russia was consistently in an economic crisis. Whether it was under Lenin, whether it was under Tsar Nicholas II. So Russians were, you know, starving. Russians were living in destitute. And Stalin's 5-year plans and the industrialization of Russia made Russia a superpower eventually. Much like FDR's terms in office brought America onto the world stage as a military might and a military superpower. And Stalin did the same thing, but at the same time, Stalin ruled through immense, dictatorial tactics. He would have his enemies purged, even people that a little whiff of potential issues, they were quickly either disappeared or murdered. And that was Stalin. Stalin spent his entire reign as dictator, leader of Russia, ruling through fear. Absolutely. But he was also beloved by so many because he did make Russia into a superpower, even though during World War II, which we covered in Oversimplified World War II, the famines, the Russian famines, which lasted for years during World War II, in which some just horrific stories, my own grandmother, who was there at the time, she was in the Soviet Union during World War II. The stories she would tell me were just, I can't even repeat them here, because they're just so heartbreaking and terrifying to hear. The depths that people went to due to the starvation and everything else.
To take over the world, punched the Russians all the way to Moscow, and then the Russians, with some help from their faithful ally, the Winter, punched them all the way back to Berlin. At this point, being allies, America, the UK, and the Soviet Union were good chums. They held a couple of conferences near the end of the war to decide what would happen next. Hey Stalin, after all your trials and tribulation, you must be pretty happy to be standing here in Berlin. Tsar Alexander made it all the way to Paris. Just give me a second. Hey man, I think something's up with Stalin. I know, right? What should we do? Shall I tell him about the bomb? Yeah, tell him about the bomb. That will scare him. So, we got this crazy new big A-bomb that can destroy an entire city in one go. Yes, my spies told me already. Oh wait, I meant to act surprised. Wow, that's amazing. He already knew. How? Am I sure I want to send nuclear secrets via unsecure public coffee shop Wi-Fi? Am I ever? Dude, use a VPN. And speaking of VPNs...
Oh boy, here we come, sponsor time, NordVPN. So that conversation literally did take place. And a lot of people theorize that one of the main reasons that Truman, well, not one of the main reasons, but one of the driving forces in Truman deciding to drop the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki was to intimidate Stalin. So the conversation actually 100% took place between Truman, Churchill, and Stalin. And Truman did tell Stalin about the bomb. And Truman was shocked at the fact that Stalin was absolutely not surprised, didn't show a hint of fear, didn't even blink, because he did know through his spies, as of course he mentions. And Russia ends up very shortly after 1945 developing their own atomic bombs. And then, of course, this begins the nuclear arms race and the mutually assured destruction of the Cold War, stockpiling weapons that could end the world.
Oh, yeah. Does the A stand for atomic or ass? Then America dropped their big A-bomb on Japan, and World War II officially came to an end. Hooray, we won! Okay, so now it's time to establish the New World Order. Stalin, you're in charge of Eastern Europe. Now, we want you to let them all hold elections. Oh yes, of course, elections. And these elections will be free and fair, right? Oh yes, certainly, free and fair. Definitely free and fair.
Of course.
Communist, 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 communist. If that's not free and fair, I don't know what is. Throughout Eastern Europe, Soviet puppet governments were established as a buffer zone between the USSR and the West, with Churchill proclaiming an Iron Curtain had descended across the continent.
Yes.
The relationship between the old allies was deteriorating fast. Over the next few years, the British intervened in the Greek Civil War to prevent a communist takeover. In Turkey, the Russians began demanding more control of Turkey's sea access routes, which prompted the US to send their largest battleship to Turkey for a friendly visit. After World War II, Iran was now...
And that's going to be very important when we get to the Cuban Missile Crisis. Turkey's going to play a huge role in the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, and basically the pact or compromise, so to speak, that prevented the Cuban Missile Crisis turning into a full-out war.
Occupied by both the Soviets and the British, with an agreement to both pull out once the war was over. The British pulled out. Stalin was like, you know what? I think I might stick around.
I think I'll hang out a bit.
Russia out of Iran? You want to know something? You guys suck. Pressure from the UN forced the Soviets to leave, and with the establishment of NATO, the Soviets had no doubt that the West was out to encircle and destroy them. And America announced the Truman Doctrine, in which they basically said, those guys are not cool, cannot be trusted, and we will do everything we can to prevent the spread of communism around the world. Many view this moment as the official declaration of the Cold War.
100%. 100%. This, I mean, there were prior events, of course, but this was kind of the official, yeah, we're not going to let you keep spreading this communist threat, the red threat, throughout the world. And yeah, this is 100% the beginning of the Cold War.
Back in Europe, everyone was living in a post-apocalyptic void brought on by the Second World War. Cities reduced to rubble, not enough food. It was terrible. This is great. The more they suffered, the more likely it is they'll turn to communism. Dude, you're really messed up. What's wrong with you? My father used to punish me severely. America realized what was going on and quickly made a move. Under the Marshall Plan, they sent $12 billion to Western Europe for its economic recovery. The countries of Stalin's Eastern Bloc looked on with envy. Hey, Czechoslovakia, you want to come get some economic aid? Yeah, but I have to check with my mom first.
I love how they position the United States with like a big phallus sticking out. Like, hey, man, you want this D? You want to get some of this D? Yeah, you know you want it. You know you want it. Uh-oh.
Sorry, America. I can't come. This was a full-on economic battle raging between capitalism and communism in Europe. If the Western nations developed faster and better than the East, that would be a defeat for Stalin. So he set up his own rival economic recovery plan, which he called Comecon, and he also set up Common Form, which gave him more political control over the Eastern...
Yes, literally, Comic-Con, yeah.
Bloc. But nowhere did this economic battle rage harder than in the city of Berlin. Caught over 100 miles behind Soviet lines, the city had been divided up between the Allies, and the western segments were still under Western control. East Berliners could travel freely to West Berlin, see the economic prosperity and think, maybe this communism thing ain't so great after all. I'm gonna have fun tonight.
Uh-oh.
You're home late.
Oh boy.
Stalin, I was just out with my friends. Friends? You stink of capitalism! You're out engaging in imperialist debauchery again! I swear, Ivan, I can't keep doing this.
Oh my god. It's like Raging Bull over here. Like, you coming home late, where you been? Where you been? I've been here. You got my steak? You call these carrots?
Stalin wanted the West out, so he said, hey, guess what? I'm blockading all of your supply routes to West Berlin. What are you gonna do about it? I suppose we'll just fly the supplies in.
Yeah. Yeah, it was called the Berlin Airlift. So after the Marshall Plan of 1948, which was basically, again, just like oversimplified as stating here, it was kind of just to buy favor, right? Which is, capitalism, right? Hey, man, we got all this money here. You want a piece of this? Come on, man. Come over to this party. This party's more bumping, man. We got better snacks. We got better drinks. We got all the honeys. We got some handsome men's over here. Whatever you're into, we got. And Stalin did attempt a blockade. And of course, when we get to 1962, blockades will also become a big deal during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And so, yeah, they started the Berlin Airlift, which literally were just flying over and dropping supplies.
All right, Truman, you in this round. The Berlin Airlift was an incredible undertaking and a major success for the Western Allies, and Stalin ended his blockade of West Berlin. His aggressive actions worried the West, but not as much as this did.
Yes. When
the
Russia
Soviet
developed
Union
the
had
bomb.
developed their very own atomic bomb. The USA no longer had a nuclear monopoly. The world now knew that if a major war broke out between the two superpowers, it would be more destructive than anyone could imagine. So it was comforting when Stalin came out and said that war between the Soviet Union and the West was unlikely. Oh, wait, inevitable. He said it was inevitable. Hey, you know who I haven't checked in on in a while? My good friend China. Whoa, what happened to you? What happened to them was a full-blown civil war that had been going on since 1927. The People's Liberation Army, under the leadership of Mao Zedong, successfully defeated the Republic of China, who...
Ooh, I appreciate that. Actually pronounce it correctly. Most people say Mao Zedong, but he said Mao Zedong. Very good.
...led to Taiwan. The now communist China and the Soviet Union signed a mutual defense treaty. This was terrible news for the West. But wait. There's more. After the Second World War, Korea was divided along the 38th parallel. In the north, the Soviets set up a communist regime. In the south, America set up an anti-communist regime. Both were led by very sweet-looking old men, but don't let that deceive you. They were both ruthless dictators, and both dreamed of reuniting Korea under their own regime. Now that he had the bomb, Stalin was feeling a little more cocky, and he finally gave Kim permission to attack. The North launched a surprise invasion of the South on June 25th, 1950. With Soviet aid, the North Koreans steamrolled through, taking Seoul in just 3 days and replacing one ruthless dictator with another. The UN were freaking out and quickly created an emergency force made up of troops from 16 countries to defend the South. The West still held Busan and made landings at Incheon near Seoul. They pushed the North Koreans out of Seoul, replacing the ruthless dictator that had replaced the first ruthless dictator with the same ruthless dictator that had previously been replaced by the new ruthless dictator. And the West then continued all the way up the Korean peninsula. At this point, China was getting worried that the UN may just keep going. The US had sent this guy to lead the operation.
Yeah, so that's General Douglas MacArthur, along with the Emperor of Japan. So this was taken after the Japanese had surrendered, and they specifically wanted this picture taken to show how large in stature and frame MacArthur was next to the Emperor of Japan, who just looks, like a little child next to him.
After winning the Pacific Theater of World War II, General Douglas MacArthur's head was big, and his balls were bigger. He reassured President Truman that there was absolutely no way at all that the Chinese would ever get involved. Meanwhile, 500,000 Chinese troops were crossing into Korea. Nuke 'em. No. Nuke 'em. No. Ah, come on! You're fired. The US considered the nuclear option, but now that the Soviets also had the bomb, they didn't want to risk all-out global destruction. The communists pushed the West right back almost to the exact same spot they had all started from, and they ended up in a stalemate, where they remained until both sides finally agreed to work towards a peace settlement in 20...
Yeah, so the peace, yeah. So basically that was the Korean War in a nutshell. But as far as China goes... so the interesting thing about it, as kind of a side story here, because it's one of my favorite things to discuss, is in the United States, specifically on the coasts, so California and New York, a lot of people are surprised when they come to New York City to see Chinese/Mexican restaurants. And they're like, that's a weird combination. So the reason for that was in the late 40s, when Mao Zedong took over and China went communist, a lot of people escaped and they went to different countries. One of the big destination spots was Cuba. Because at the time, Cuba was not yet under the rule of Castro. America had a huge presence in Cuba, especially with resorts, casinos, all that stuff. So they all, a lot of them go there. And of course, they start picking up the language, they start picking up the cuisine, everything else, only for 10 years later, in 1959, for Fidel Castro and his merry band of communists to overthrow Batista. And guess what? They were like William Hurt at the end of Spaceballs. They were like, oh no, not again. So then many of them went to the United States because, hey, it was close, right? So some went to Florida, some went to New York, and a lot went to San Francisco. Actually, the birthplace of Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee, a lot of people don't know, was actually born in America. His father was a traveling actor. So that's why you'll see on the coast especially various mixes of Chinese. And I mean, they call them Mexican, but obviously, you know, sometimes they'll say, you know, Chinese Spanish food, but a lot of times they put Chinese Mexican, which is not actually correct. But it's just an interesting tidbit that I like to share.
Back in America, Americans decided they wanted a new president who would be tough on communism. So they elected famed World War II General Eisenhower, who was really hard to draw. It's 1953. Hey, Stalin, how you doing? Oh, he's dead. He had a cerebral hemorrhage and his reign of terror kind of came back to bite him in the ass because he had imprisoned all of his best doctors and those that were left were too terrified to treat him. The new leader, Nikita Khrushchev...
That is very, very true. That is very true, especially if you watch... the movie, I think it's called The Death of Stalin. Stalin. It's actually a great movie. If you haven't seen it, I definitely recommend it.
Khrushchev called a meeting and said, hey guys, you know how Stalin was imprisoning and murdering us all for doing basically nothing? Yeah, he was kind of a jerk. I'm really not sure how this is news to you. Khrushchev went on a campaign of de-Stalinization. Statues of Stalin were taken down, Stalingrad was renamed, and Khrushchev announced that he wanted the Soviet people to be happy and would allow greater freedom in the Soviet Union. So how did that work out?
And Stalin's, so famously, Vladimir Lenin, is still to this day on display in a mausoleum. His body is just weird. His body is there. It's almost 100 years old, but you could still see his body on display. They did the same thing with Stalin, but quickly Khrushchev changed his mind, especially after they renamed Stalingrad, and instead Stalin was buried instead of being put on display.
Well, an uprising in East Germany was brutally suppressed, a revolution in Hungary was brutally suppressed, and demonstrations in Poland were brutally suppressed. although he did finally allow some mild reforms. Back in the Soviet Union, he permitted more cultural expression, but then began banning stuff based on his own personal taste. Modern art looks like a child urinated on a canvas. Banned. Jazz music sounds like the feeling of needing to fart. Banned. Your poetry is really depressing. How could anyone in the Soviet Union be depressed? You're banned. Khrushchev wanted the Soviet people to be happy, but not like that, or that, or that. Young people began enjoying abhorrent Western pop culture. Son, remove that disgusting imperialist apparel at once. Shut up, Dad. You can't tell me what to do. Well, would you look at that? Turns out he can tell me what to do. The West had initially liked the cut of Khrushchev's jib, but world events.
Yeah, Khrushchev's jib and his eyebrows. Khrushchev had some crazy-ass eyebrows. He had them Scorsese eyebrows. Khrushchev, a lot of people ask me what I think of Khrushchev. Khrushchev was definitely a lot better than many of his other, not contemporaries, but other leaders of Russia, including, of course, Stalin, Lenin, Brezhnev, etc. He was a little bit of an aloof person, but he did have some funny lines. One of them was when America was saying, we're going to land a man on the moon. And a journalist asked Khrushchev what he thought of that. And he says, we're going to land a man on the sun. And they're like, how the hell are you going to land a man on the sun? They're going to burn up. He's like, we're going to send them at night. So, or when he heard that America had spent millions and millions of dollars on a pen that could write upside down in zero gravity for the people, for the astronauts who would go into space. And Khrushchev responded, yeah, we're just going to give them pencils. There you go. Millions of dollars saved. So he had all these, colloquialisms and funny one-liners. But deep down, he was a good leader. And also, again, I keep on going back to the Cuban Missile Crisis because it was the penultimate event that kind of or the zenith, at least, of the Cold War. We had gotten close many times, but that was definitely the closest call. And we'll see that he was actually very instrumental in preventing any issues.
And soon soured relations even more. The two sides were spying on each other a whole lot throughout the Cold War. The KGB had spies and informants in nearly every aspect of Western life and government, so much so that whenever the US tried to send spies into the Soviet Union, the KGB were usually ready to arrest them on the spot. Members of the Manhattan Project aided the Soviet Union in acquiring the bomb. Some American officials believed they were on the wrong side. I'll sell you 3 secrets for $5 million. Okay. Go ahead. The Allies are digging a tunnel under East Berlin to tap your communications. There's an American agent living at this address in Moscow, and sometimes, when I'm home alone, I like to put on my wife's dresses, sit in the corner, and cry for hours. Very interesting. In America, fear took hold during the Red Scare and the Macarthur trials. Yeah. American values imploded as fear of communism collided with freedom of thought and expression, and communist kind of became a buzzword thrown around to describe anything people didn't like. Hollywood? Communist. Your next door neighbor's dog? Communist. When the grocery store cashier asks if you need a bag when you clearly can't carry 10 tubs of baconaise in your hands, communist. But one area in particular where the US had an edge over the Soviet Union was in its espionage technology. In particular, U-2 spy planes flew across Russia carrying out surveillance from the skies. There was a nasty incident in 1960 though, when one was shot down and Khrushchev was furious. Who the hell is this? He's a high-altitude weather enthusiast who flew off course. Okay, that sounds plausible. Wait a minute. Why does he have a gun and a poison needle? Because he's a very naughty high-altitude weather enthusiast. But much to America's concern, the Soviet Union appeared to be ahead in the space race. Everyone freaked out when Russia launched the world's first satellite, and then they actually sent a man into space. Even worse, there also appeared to be a missile gap in the Soviets' favor, and Khrushchev was so confident that he even allowed the US to set up a technology exhibit in Moscow, attended by a certain Vice President Richard Nixon. Check this out. We have color TV. Yes, but we've been to space and can obliterate you with our massive nuclear arsenal. Check out this vegetable peeler. Tensions in...
Yeah, so there's a lot being covered here. So, yes, McCarthyism throughout the 50s was one of the just most biggest black eyes, basically, on American history. McCarthy was given a full reign to commit terror and basically accused pretty much everybody of being a communist. from Hollywood actors to musicians to politicians. I mean, everybody. The McCarthy hearings were nothing more than a witch hunt, and spread amazing fear. Yes, the space race, pretty much the Russians were leading the way, as they mentioned. The launching of Sputnik was, or Sputnik. Sputnik was an absolute, like, oh boy. But when they sent the first man into space, which was Yuri Gagarin, Yuri Gagarin was just a Russian hero. That was a big, like, what the fuck moment for America. They're like, geez, I mean, not only are they sending, we sent a monkey. Yeah, they sent a man. So, yeah, that was a big deal.
Increased further when both sides upgraded their atomic bombs to hydrogen bombs. And after West Germany was allowed to join NATO in 1955, Khrushchev set up the Defensive Warsaw Pact, strengthening the military ties between the Soviet Union and its satellite states. In 1960, Americans decided they wanted a new president who would be tough on communism, so they elected John F. Kennedy. The Soviet Union was advancing its technology, but it was also bleeding its coffers dry, and all of the money was going towards the military, not the people. Life under communism was still as hard as ever, and Berlin remained a thorn in the Soviet side. The contrast between the economically prosperous West and the struggling East was clearer day by day, and East Berliners were still able to freely travel to the West. Now, many of them were deciding to stay there. Millions defected to West Germany via West Berlin, causing Eastern factories to lose workers and taking a heavy toll on the economy. Soviet leaders decided this couldn't continue any longer. First, Khrushchev.
In 5 seconds, you can skip this ad. What you can't skip is climate change. But there is something you can do right.
So actually, my mom talked about this in one of the videos, particularly in the 60s, because she was born in the mid-50s in Odessa. And yeah, I mean, the blandness of life, not to say that they were totally, just in the dark of everything. I mean, they knew of and they had access to pop culture things, whether it be music, movies, and all that stuff. But it was in short supply, but mainly it was just life was so drab, It was so depressing. Everything was like gray, Everybody had the same television. Everybody had the same radio. Everybody had the same car. I mean, those who could afford luxuries like that. And food. I mean, food was just in short supply. And a lot of times she talked about kind of like farmers markets almost. We called them in Russia bazas. And at these bazas, they would have, all these independent, people selling, certain types of foods, but most people just couldn't afford them.
Leave West Berlin, or else. Or else what? Or else I'll be really mad at you. Yeah, no, we're gonna stay. Listen, man, West Berlin is ours, East Berlin is yours. That's just how it is. Kennedy felt pretty good about his show of American resolve. But wait a second, did you catch that? Let's replay it.
East Berlin is yours.
Uh-oh, Kennedy just told Khrushchev that the USA wouldn't interfere in what the Soviets did with their section of Berlin, so Khrushchev came up with a new idea. We're gonna build a wall, and it's gonna be a big, beautiful wall, and it's gonna keep out all the Mexicans. No, sir, that's wrong, it's gonna keep in these Berliners. Oh, sorry, it's gonna keep in all the Mexicans. On August 13th, 1961...
Yeah, I mean, it is, because like I said, Khrushchev, while being a shrewd politician, very street smart, so to speak, extensive military career, he could be a little aloof, like I said.
Berliners woke up to find their city divided into two, with barbed wire and guards blocking the border between East and West. Over time, a wall was constructed throughout the city. Families were torn apart. Thousands would risk their lives escaping over the wall, and hundreds would die trying. To the despair of Berliners, the West were unable to do anything about it. But the wall did put on full display the failure of the communist system. As Kennedy said, democracy is not perfect, but we have never had to put a wall up to keep our people in. As part of the agreement between the two sides, U.S. diplomats were still allowed to travel to East Berlin. But suddenly, East Berlin crossing guards started giving them the business. And Kennedy was like, nah-uh. In October, the U.S. rolled tanks up to the crossing point at Checkpoint Charlie as a show of strength. The Soviets did the same, and the two were in a standoff. They stayed like that for 16 hours, and the world braced for nuclear Armageddon. Thankfully, though, Kennedy called Khrushchev directly and was like, "Hey man, this is getting way too hot. How about you back your tanks up by an inch and we'll do the same?" "Sounds good." "Okay, how about you back your tanks up by another inch and we'll follow suit?" "Alright, hey, you want to do another inch?" And they both very slowly inched away from the apocalypse. Phew, let's hope that's the biggest crisis of my presidency. It wasn't.
Yep, so that's I guess where we're going to pick up in part 2, the Cuban Missile Crisis, which again was one of the scariest times in world history. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. Hoped I could add a little bit here and there on the subject, but again, love Oversimplified, love their content. Just wish they would be a little nicer to my reactions and not block them. That'd be pretty cool. And as always, again, check the links in the description if you want to support the show. Really appreciate it. And also check out other links for my podcast, the Discord, Instagram, and all that good stuff. I've been Teacher Ready, and I'll catch you in the next one. Fam! And thank you to all the Patreon supporting Teacher Ready, starting with the Chancellors, Elena G, Caleb, Laura, Phoenix, Blue Tech, Nazvanyu, Douglas, the Principals, Aaron Shepard, Spacey Doodle, Clement, Vijandra, Alan, Alex, King Panda, Freeman, Moody Kakari, Nathan, Chad, Chris, The Boggle, Sophia, Robin, Lord Gandalf, Luna, and Moderately Upset Bro. I've been Teacher Ready, and I'll see you next time.